Thank you all for coming. Today, Alan Toy is from Commercial Law Department, and me, Sally, are going to talk to you about online marketing. I'm going to just briefly introduce the topic, and I'll focus on two tools that you currently have to do assignment marking online. And Alan's going to share his experience on marking online for tests and exams that are normally done on paper. All right. So imagine you got students having paper assignments, and you got lots of students, and so some of these things might seem familiar. So you're shuffling through these pages to look for the right places to mark. This is especially worse for tests. And then you also, if you're sharing this marking with someone else, waiting for them to finish their pile before you can get to it. And then now, you're writing the same comments over and over and over again, thinking, oh my God, if I could just copy and paste these, this would look great. Or do you wish you can talk to them or edit them like Andrew does? Or you have written so many comments on the assignments, and they don't even bother to collect their script. Like, why? Why did I bother? Or worst case, have you lost anybody's script? Before or after you mark them? I don't know which one's worse. And if you think, oh, surely there's got to be a better way, there is. You can get your students to submit the assignments online in Canvas, and you can mark online. We have two tools that's both integrated in Canvas. There's a native Canvas speed grader and Turnitin Grey Mark. They both provide very similar features, so I'm just going to highlight a few key differences so that way you can pick and choose depending on what suits you. First thing is rubric. You're all marking with rubrics. Sometimes you have a long list, and in Canvas it allows you to have different scale for different items. So some of the points might mark out of 5, some might mark out of 2, 3, you choose. In Turnitin, there needs to be the same scale. If you're marking out of a 7-point scale, there has to be 7 points across all your items. Comment bank. There's one thing that people really love from Turnitin Grey Mark is the drag and drop comment bank you can share with your colleagues as well, that you can use and reuse over and over. Canvas, you can work around this by copy and pasting from a Word doc. When it comes to analytics, earlier Pushpul and Joe has shown this rubric analytics report. It's currently available from UOA Toolbox, thanks to our internal IT team. That's not a Canvas feature, but we do have it available only if you mark with rubrics through Canvas. The other difference that I've been pointed out to is the voice feedback. Some of them prefer to use voice marking. In Canvas, you kind of just look through the whole script and then you give them a voice feedback, whereas in Turnitin, it allows you to actually scroll through the paper and record at the same time. If you want to do that in Canvas, I suggest 2 screens. That works. So now, if you've got any other questions regarding how to use these tools, please come see me or come see one of our team members. Now I'm handing you over to Alan to talk about his experience with marking online on paper for paper assistance.
Thanks, Sally. So my name's Alan Toy, and as Sally said, I'm from the Commercial Law Department. So I just thought I'd start with what my marking requirements are. And the thing is, I've been using a system called CrowdMark, which is a QR-coded assessment. Every page of a student's answer gets a unique QR code. It's scanned up to the cloud, and you mark it by using your computer accessing the system. So you mark it through the computer. And so for commercial law, I was the difficult case for CrowdMark, because CrowdMark was initially designed by a mathematics professor, and the types of assessments they have look very different from the kinds of assessments I have. And over the last couple of years, CrowdMark has evolved. It's got better at serving the different range of assessments, and it's got much better at doing what I want to do with it. So I would hate to go back. I mean, CrowdMark has made just so many improvements over the last few years that I would hate to go back, because it's now very, very good at doing what I want. So for commercial law, I usually have essay or problem type questions. Students write about 2 to 3 pages in about half an hour for each question. I usually give feedback of around 3 to 6 sentences per question. And my marking's mostly done by myself. If I set the question, I usually do the marking for that question myself. For example, I teach a course called Employment Law, Com Law 314. Usually for the questions that I write, I do team teach with a couple of other lecturers, so we'll usually be marking the questions that we set ourselves from our own topics. Sometimes I need substitute markers, very occasionally, and I did actually need to find one at short notice at the start of this week. And so I put an advertisement in the law school, and I found a PhD student there who was able to immediately, and within the space of a few hours, and they don't, to my knowledge, they don't use CrowdMark in the law school, so she'd never seen the system before. In the space of a few hours, I was able to electronically, and that was important because I just simply couldn't at that stage trot down the hill to physically see her, and certainly couldn't take her any scripts at that point. So electronically, I was able to introduce her to the system. She was able to see how it works. It's very intuitive. She'd never seen it before. She was able to, within the space of a few hours, see exactly what I wanted, the kind of feedback that I wanted to give to the students. And I was able to check the marking and the way that she was doing that, the feedback she was giving, electronically as well, as she was doing it. And so it was an incredibly efficient system for getting a new marker on board, even somebody who'd never used the system before. Multi-choice. I've got a lot of experience with using multi-choice, but over the years I've reluctantly come to the conclusion that it's not super helpful for the kinds of assessment that I want to do in employment law, so I don't use that. So what I've found with CrowdMark is that I'm able to give better feedback, because in X amount of time, the number of words of feedback that I can deliver through using CrowdMark is much greater than if I was physically writing those comments. And the reason is because there's a lot of efficiency in terms of if a student makes a similar mistake or the same mistake as a previous student, I can easily, if you type 3 letters of a comment that's been given before, and this might be a paragraph comment, it will auto-suggest the ones that have those letters. You can see, and you can easily just click on the comment, add that in to a particular place in the student's answer. So in terms of the feedback that I can give through CrowdMark, it's greatly enhanced than if I was having to write those comments. And it's much more legible, of course, because it's not my handwriting, it's typed. So the feedback that I can give is better. And there's really two good things about this, because I'm giving better feedback and the students are getting their feedback because the scripts are emailed back to them. Their scanned script with the feedback is emailed back to them. So all they have to do is open the email. And as soon as we finish marking, whether it's in the middle of the mid-semester break or whenever, I can instantly send that back to them. They don't have to wait another week or two to come to class. We don't have to waste time in class handing those assessments back to them. We just email them. So all the students can potentially, if they want to, just open the email and see their assessment. So I'm giving better feedback and the students are getting better feedback. Marks are added up correctly. I've got 250 students in employment law. To add up those marks and to check those marks, if the lecturers are using calculators to do it, takes quite a significant amount of time. If we don't have to do that, the computer just does it automatically, and the computer never makes a mistake. In the 2.5 years I've been using it, it hasn't made a mistake. And the point I've already made about not having to send scripts to somebody else and then get them back to check them is just far better with the electronic system. There is some setup time. I've said 1 hour for 100 students. I mean, I'm more efficient than that. For my 250 students, it took me an hour this time. That is basically scanning, uploading the scripts through the system. For examinations, that's for tests. But for examinations will do that for you. So there isn't that setup time if examinations does it. One downside, and this is really something you can't avoid, and this is a reason why some of my colleagues don't like CrowdMark, and that's perfectly reasonable, which is that you need to use the computer screen. And so people who are worried about looking at the computer screen for long periods of time, yes, that's an issue with CrowdMark. I mean, my response to that would be that paper-based marking, if you're doing that over a desk for a long time, there are health issues with that as well. So I've got concerns with the other type of marking too. Nothing's perfect. The other thing is that you need to tell the class about CrowdMark, because one of the advantages of CrowdMark is when you're marking, it takes you right to the question that you're marking. Problem is, if the students haven't put their answer in the right space, then it's going to take you to the wrong place. That's not much of an issue for me, because I tell my students it's not like the standard university answer booklet. Please don't cross out question 1 and write question 2. It's not like that. So so most of my students can do that pretty accurately, but you just have to educate them a little bit about that. Do my colleagues like using it? I'd say some of them do. This mostly comes down to looking at the computer screen issue, I think, which is reasonable. I like looking at computer screens, and it's easy for me to read something on a computer screen. For some people, that's not natural, and they prefer to mark on paper. But about 30% of the people that I've introduced to CrowdMark have continued to use it. One thing we did try once was allowing people to mark the scripts offline before we scanned and uploaded them. I thought that was a good idea at one point in my life, but unfortunately it had some disadvantages, which were that examinations could not scan because we weren't in time. It took us, my colleagues, a little while to mark that. So also, we didn't have the security of having those exams on the cloud instantly, which meant that potentially, this didn't happen of course, but potentially there was, possibility that one could be lost or whatever. So it just wasn't a good idea. If you're going to use CrowdMark, I advise committing to it completely. I don't force anyone to use that for the courses that I coordinate. If somebody doesn't want to use it, we don't use that, unless it's an assessment that I'm just doing myself, which in that case, I definitely use CrowdMark, because I just find it so much better than paper-based marking. Some of my colleagues think it doesn't reduce marking time. Perhaps they have a different way of marking than me. For me, in terms of the feedback that I can give in X amount of time and the feedback that the students get and the accuracy of the system, it is far better than paper-based marking. So overall, is it beneficial? Absolutely. When I'm forced to go back to paper-based marking and to mark on paper and use the calculator to add it up, I find it quite frustrating. I can do it, but it's just not as efficient and not as good as if I'm using CrowdMark to mark that same assessment. Students seem to prefer the increased transparency. There are a number of ways that CrowdMark increases transparency. It gives them marking distribution graphs for each question, and then a total one for the whole assessment. They can get their script emailed to them as soon as it's ready, and so it's just easier for them to get their assessment and to see that transparency. So in my opinion, CrowdMark has definitely helped. It helps in terms of better teaching and learning outcomes for the types of courses that I'm teaching, because this is the kind of feedback that I want to give. I want to give written assessment feedback, and I want to give it in written form. That's the best way for me. And so for this kind of course, it's just an excellent system. And it wasn't always easy to start with, 2.5 years ago, but over the years, it's definitely become the kind of system that's just far better than it was, and it's, in my opinion, almost perfect for what I want to do now. So that's us. We're happy to answer any questions.
It's a very practical one about the licensing. Does your department have the license? How big is it?
the moment we have university-wide license, just most people don't know about it and so they don't use it. So we have that for last year and for this year. The business school actually pay for the second half of the year.
Can I give you just some idea of how widely it's used? Because I think I was the first person to use this year, and so I have super admin rights, so I can see who's using it and what's happening. Probably shouldn't have told you that. But as of last week, we've had over 1.2 million pages of assessments scanned through the system, and it just works. Brilliant.
Is this for assessments during the semester or only for exams at the end?
I use this for tests that I'm making a mid-semester test at the moment through the system, and I will be using it for the exam as well. So I've used it for quite a lot of tests and exams over the last couple of years.
And do you just mark the bits that they get right with a tick or something, or do you actually put comments in?
I don't use ticks myself, but you can with the system, and the substitute marker that I've got, she's using them, that's fine. I prefer to just put comments in particular places.
You can put ticks in, because that's what our accounting department uses a lot, is ticks. And they can count the number of ticks for the points.
So just one last question. In 2009, I reverted to writing in the margins for a master's student, and he thanked me profusely for all the feedback I gave him and asked me, please don't do that to me again. I couldn't read what you'd written. So how much of the 70% of people that are not taking up electronic marking have legible comments for their students or legibility issues?
That's a difficult question to answer. I mean, the comments that we can do with CrowdMark is sort of semi-translucent. So you're not typing it in the margin. You can place it over the student's work. They can see it. They can see their writing beneath it. They can see the comment that's sitting on top.
Typed, it's not
Typed, yeah.
I was just wondering how this would integrate. You know, I know there's some testing going on with doing computer-based tests and exams, which will take away that whole need to scan. Is that going to work with CrowdMark?
Absolutely. I don't know if it would work with CrowdMark, but that would be excellent, because then we wouldn't have any issues reading students' writing.
Yeah, so that will replace this. This is because we have to get students coming and sit there and we watch them write their their tests and exams for a few hours, and then we got these papers to deal with. And so that system is basically handling that process.
Is it possible to use a pen to write? Is it possible to use video recording?
I wouldn't do that, but you can if you really wanted to. Yeah, you can if you want to. There's always workarounds.
how to set up on that.
Okay, we'll have to talk afterwards. Yeah, I'm not going to go through the technical details here, but it's a wizard process to go through it, and you do have to have a template, and we do also have all that, and help me. Yes.
Thanks, Alan. What have you found your percentage of comments is original comments versus recycled comments on the comment bank?
I use a lot of recycled ones, but you don't have to use the exact one. Often what I find myself doing is editing a comment if a student's made a similar one.
One more. This one's not specific. Go on, Joe. I've heard that they're replacing crowd.
Those up next.
Just wait 1 minute.
Yeah, so the thing is, and again, it's a system to trying to handle your paper-based, assessments that you want to scan and then mark online. And so the process, it's about if we can mark online rather than mark on paper. It's just losing students' paper assignments one thing, losing exams is a whole other different thing.
I mean, the point I made a couple of times was I'd hate to go back 2.5 years. So I hope that if we get a system similar to another QR-coded assessment, we're not going back 2.5 years.